Gramps.
Yes.
What was life like during the hippie revolution?
I wasn't that aware of it. I was aware of it, but I really didn't think it was that deep and pervasive. But when your mother was 1 year old, Grandpa Gene and I went up to San Francisco because Grandpa Gene had a bridge tournament. So we decided to go into the Haight-Ashbury. Those were the two streets where so much of the hippie
One of the streets
performances.
Haight?
H-A-I-G-H-T. Haight
Oh.
and Ashbury. And we saw more stoned people. And I have that on an old Super 8 film or whatever. Yeah, I wasn't that impressed with them personally. And it was all perpetuated by the LSD drug guru, Dr. Timothy Leary from Harvard, who burned his brains out, I think. And
Who's this guy?
oh, he started pretty much tune in, turn on, drop out. That was the saying of the hippie movement.
Tune in, turn on, drop out.
Yeah, use drugs, drop acid.
Oh.
And then the Beatles followed that.
Beatles suck. They're great songwriters, don't get me wrong.
They're great
But like their
songwriters.
whole drug thing, like past like We All Live in a Yellow Submarine, I'm glad.
But
I'm
I
glad
don't.
we died. So, you know what? Good.
So it influenced fashion, it influenced music, and then there were those who dropped out of society. They didn't want to be in the establishment, and those are now 60 and 70-year-old running a lot of government agencies.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So like
None of them
ex-hippies are running the government? They
Don't ask me to name them.
you know what happened? They hit rock bottom and realized like it actually has some semblance of importance to their lives, and you can't truly ever leave society. Just ask Henry David Thoreau, who goes 5 minutes outside of Boston,
Yeah.
or outside of Cambridge, and pretends like he's in the forest. Like, come on, you're not in the forest.
Next question.
Okay. What was the northern perception of the civil rights movement?
Okay, there was no segregation in the North. I lived in New York. You never saw it. I went to school with blacks, Puerto Ricans, everybody. So I really never had that much of a sense of injustice going on. But then watching it as it unfolded on television with the March on Selma, it made me aware. I really, as they would use the term consciousness raising, it made me aware that there was a lot of double standards in the country. So that's pretty much what my impression, what it did to me.
You were kind of ignorant to it being in the North. It wasn't really a factor in your life.
No.
But then when it came, you're like, wow, there's some really messed up stuff going down there.
This is
We should reform this.
Yeah.
At which point they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't go to see him speak.
Yeah, well, I didn't know. I did hear Martin Luther King speak finally when I was in college. At Fairleigh Dickinson, he spoke on the Madison campus. And I was way far back, but he did have that commanding deep voice.
He's a preacher.
Yeah, and they forget to call him the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And he spoke about turning your cheek, Jesus' instructions to your enemies.
He was nonviolent.
Nonviolent.
Very great leader. Nothing but respect for an amazing man.
Yeah, it was
He cheated
amazing.
on his wife.
Yeah, but he was an amazing man.
Yeah,
Amazing,
I don't think you
courageous.
can take that away from what he did.
No.
So, what was your opinion of the Vietnam War?
Well, there again, I was teaching school in Las Vegas, Nevada, married then to Grandpa Gene, who was stationed right there on the Air Force Base that was training the pilots who were going to go over to Vietnam, as well as we had pilots that would come back, refresh, and then go back over. I didn't understand much about what the war really was because I was only 23 years old. We weren't that news savvy then. And when one of my students' father was shot down, that brought it home as real. The little boy was in my 4th grade class, and his mother and everybody on base knew that Colonel, and I can't remember his name, was killed flying over Vietnam. So I was first thinking about it then. It was a blur to me.
It wasn't really something in your consciousness.
Not really. Napalm became part of the consciousness. Nellis Air Force Base, where I was teaching across the street from, they were all military kids, most of them anyhow. They had a demonstration of napalm, which was supposed to denude the forests because Vietnam was highly forested, and they wanted to see where the enemies were, which were even hard to see because they didn't have uniforms oftentimes. The Viet Cong were very secretive. Yeah, so they gave us a napalm demonstration on the Air Force Base, and the heat from it was amazing, how far it reached, and we were standing way far back. It started to wake me up. there are so many pointers I could give you now on the war, but that would take up too much.
Yeah,
too
we're
much.
going to the next question.
Yeah.
How did you and most of the country feel about the Watergate scandal?
I thought it was a joke. And I think today it's like a kindergartner stealing somebody's crayon. But the press is very left-wing, and they report what they want to do to destroy a person. And they wanted to destroy Richard Nixon.
To be fair, he was a creep.
Oh, he could have been a creep. He could have been a creep.
No, it's because it was the group that did it was creep.
Well,
So that was a pun.
but look what the presidents today get away with. I mean, that's why I'm saying that. Look at Benghazi that's being covered up. Look at
I don't know who Benghazi is.
Benghazi is. Oh, let's go to the next question. Are you teasing me? Right?
No, I don't
Oh,
know Benghazi.
It's just a recent happening where in Libya, many of our government officials were murdered, and the administration's looking the other way and trying to cover it up.
That's bull.
Yeah,
Which
those
is
are things
400
people should worry about, not Watergate.
I like Nixon. Nixon's a cool guy, except for the fact that he was kind of crazy.
He was paranoid. Yeah, they say he was paranoid.
Freak. But he's cool. I like him. The football guy.
Yeah.
Yorba Linda, Southern California guy. Well, he's a
You've been to the
messed
Nixon
up
many
guy.
times. You have.
Well, he's a totally messed up guy. I respect what he did as a president. Great president, lowered the national debt, established environmental regulations. In addition to opening trade with China, although it is a communist nation, it greatly helped a stagnant U.S. economy. There's a lot of great
formed
things
the
he did.
EPA, which is now becoming out of
Yeah.
control octopus with its tentacles.
But it needed its help originally. They needed protection of wildlife, and it was not given at first.
Yeah, it just didn't have enough restraints on it.
Yeah.
I think.
So, I would love to hear your commentary on what life during the Cuban Missile Crisis was like.
I was really scared. I was a freshman in college. And my brother was on the USS Barstow as a gunnery officer. And they were stationed in, the south of France, the Riviera. What a hard place to be.
That's pretty nice.
All of a sudden, we get the phone call, they turned around, they're heading to Cuba. There's a missile crisis. And I got really scared. My brother could be killed. And we were freshmen in college and coming home from a field trip in upstate New York. And that's all they were talking about. And we really thought we were on the brink of war because Russia was an ally to Cuba. So it was frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, with, was it Khrushchev? Yes, Nikolai Khrushchev?
Nikita Khrushchev.
Nikita Khrushchev.
Yeah.
I mean, he lost his job because of that. In retrospect, I bet you he would have done it. He would have started the nuclear war. It's crazy how close they actually were.
90 miles
Yeah.
from Florida.
Yeah, but you can take Florida. I'm kidding. Florida's okay. The south of Florida's okay. Take the middle part. The Everglades, nobody likes those.
The alligators do.
Nobody likes alligators.
Oh, but let's go on. You're wasting this poor man's.
What was the nation's reaction to the Roe v. Wade case?
Another thing I wasn't that aware of at the time, I am a lot aware of Roe v. Wade. All of a sudden, I noticed people starting to demonstrate. What are they demonstrating? I didn't catch it. I wasn't really that aware of abortion and how much abortion was used, and I wasn't yet aware of the religious context of it and murdering babies and so on. So what I think is it's affected too much of the elections now. There's too much social voting going on rather than voting that should be based on our economic and military policies.
Do you think that abortion should be legal or illegal?
It's a hard question. It depends upon, we'll look at how it's been taken to the horrible extreme with this doctor, I think Gozell in Pennsylvania, who was, are you familiar with that?
No.
Oh, he's been an abortion murderer for years. The babies are being born, partial birth abortions, which Bill Clinton sanctified the law, they can be born at 7 and 8 months. They're a live baby, and they're killing them. He was snipping their spinal cords.
That's messed up.
Awful stuff. Well, they are prosecuting him.
Yeah.
So it's gone too
Was
far.
that illegal?
That is murder. That's absolutely
Is it
murder.
illegal though?
I think they will prove it's illegal.
Okay.
It's
That's
murder. It was a viable baby, or they just leave him on a back table.
An interesting side piece that needs to be mentioned is that the crime rates in New York City have been directly linked to abortion. So when abortion kicked in, around 16 years, I think it was 1980s, when, I forget the mayor's name, but when he came in and said, I'm going to clean up the city,
Oh, Giuliani.
nothing he did actually helped it. It was
Oh, I disagree.
chiefly
But
the
go
lack
ahead.
of abortion. So
Was
the
it?
people who would be having babies, who couldn't like deal with them,
Yeah.
are the people who would neglect their babies and who would turn into killers, thieves, criminals. And thus, it's not justifying the abortion. If you believe it's death, then it takes the same amount of lives. But the murder rate and the actual rate of crime went down substantially because of the abortion laws, which I just think is interesting.
That's interesting.
Side piece to the.
There's so much to say on that too. I saw how New York was cleaned up when Giuliani was mayor. I grew up in New York City and
I'm
downtown.
not saying it didn't help. I'm just
Yeah.
saying there's a major overlooked factor
Interesting.
is the abortion implications. Of legalizing it.
A lot of people use abortion for lazy birth control.
Yes.
It's really bad.
I completely disagree with that ideal, and I think it needs to be a first trimester thing. But
Yes.
I believe with all my heart that it should be legal in this nation. If it isn't, I think there's a serious issue.
Well, it is legal, and I've always thought in the early days, and I probably, a woman's body, as they say, is her own to do with because it could have been rape, it could have been incest.
Oh, unless you're like a southern governor, and it has to be a legitimate rape.
Oh, really? That was such a foolish.
You know they have an entire chart, I think of like 20 expressions that it's like Republican southern governors and like senators have mentioned about like their ignorance on rape. It's absolutely astounding that these men are partially ruining the nation. I'm not saying it's just a Republican thing. I'm saying Democrats say just as stupid things but on different topics. Just it
that
tends
was
to
a foolish
focus on
statement.
rape and abortion when it comes to southern, Baptist.
Well, that gets a lot of the press because, again, press is
Left-wing spies.
pretty left, pretty secular, pretty anti-evangelical, whatever. So they print those stories and blow them up and blow them up and blow. And other scandals just get. It's
So
not.
you're saying be a Democrat if I'm going into politics, so I can just get things pushed under the rug?
I say you have to really examine your moral conscience on what you want to do. with
Government's
politics.
never been a moral thing. Never
You
once
have to.
has government been based on morals. Government is based on manipulation and using of power.
Well, George Washington wouldn't feel that way.
George Wash was the only dude that can use this. He's an anomaly. Every other founding father, they had some benefits, but they wanted it for economic purposes, and they wanted it for their freedom, and they wanted it for their business. They didn't want to feel fettered to it. It's like breaking up with a